Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Shriya and today we will be talking about elections in Japan, more on Sri Lanka's political crisis and the Wimbledon Tennis Championship. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party has won a major victory in the upper house elections in Japan. Reports said that the party and its ally won over 75 of the 125 seats that were up for election in the House of Councillors. Elections were held on Sunday, 2 days after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was also from the LDP. The victory of the LDP and its allies is likely to set the stage for the revision of its pacifist constitution. The LDP has been in the forefront of pushing for a more aggressive and militaristic foreign policy, which has continued under Abe's successor and current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Anish joins us for more. So Anish, welcome to the show, and my first question to you is LDP victory. So polls had already predicted it and there's nothing really surprising about it, but what does this victory really mean for Japan, the country, and the constitution of Japan?
Yes, so while the LTP victory was kind of expected, the scope of the victory was obviously uh, still came out a little more unexpected. And I mean, like it was also sort of expected with what happened in the past 3 days. The assassination has actually impacted and even created a wave of sympathy votes. We also saw the turnout rate go beyond 50%, which is one of the first, like in for a long while. I think since a decade or so, when it has actually gone beyond 50% for the House of Councillors vote. Uh, and this shows that obviously the sort of sympathy wave has benefited the more right wing in the Japanese political spectrum. It wasn't just the ruling bloc that won. It was not just the LDP Cometa alliance, but also a right-wing party called Japan Innovation Party that actually also won a considerable number of seats, even though they called it a loss, defeat of sorts. But they still gained a lot more at the cost of opposition groups and more progressive groups. And this means that all of them are who are kind of in the same page when it comes to changing Japanese constitution are going to have a bigger say now. Now we are looking at them together having more than 2/3 of the required votes that is necessary in the House of Councillors to make an amendment possible. Now that means they can amend any part of the constitution with the majority that they already have in the lower house. So this is going to be quite detrimental because the Japan's constitutions, this pacifist nature that it is quite well renowned for since the Second World War, is an outcome of a lot of social processes and political processes at the time, but also as guarantees to its neighboring nations, not just China, but also South Korea, which is another US ally and also considered to be a Japanese ally. So all of them are going to be on the brink now if Japan moves forward with any changes to that pacifist position in its constitution. And not only that, to give the sort of legitimacy, that constitutional legitimacy that the right wing in Japan has been harking for a long time to its military. And that is something that will also threaten relations with and strain relations even with more friendly nations in East Asia. Japan has, we also need to remember, Japan, despite always having this right wing element for a long time in its political spectrum, it never became the sort of central force driving any kind of belligerency on behalf of the empire in the region. It was always the United States that was at the forefront of any kind of tensions in the region. Now, this is going to change definitely under Kishida because he's already somebody who goes for the militarization path much more seriously, but also with the support that he can get from his opposition allies. This can actually mean that Japan is going to change that sort of nature of just being a passive ally in the imperial spectrum and not just and become more like an active participant in whatever tensions that may come around.
And coming to Shinzo Abe and his assassination, although he was not very active, he was not in power, but he was still active in politics. So what does his assassination mean for the party now and the country now that LDP is, showing some strength in the upper house?
The LDP has definitely milked the assassination for sure, because in the assassination coming so close to the election definitely benefited them. We definitely saw a significant rise. Obviously, LDP, as I said, was set to win, but the opposition coalition that, or a sort of patchwork coalition that existed, was still formidable enough to limit that scope of victory. And that happened in the lower house, the parliamentary election that we saw. So this definitely helped them. They're going to use his legacy now to continue with the sort of popularity that they have reaped in the past few days, primarily because it actually helps them mask a lot of internal domestic problems that they already have. Uh, Abe's biggest legacy is not necessarily Abenomics or whatever that they're trying to talk about, but it's primarily the fact that he has pushed the right uh, to the mainstream in Japan. Even though he presented a very moderate face, was still quite a right winger in many of the central topics that still animate Japanese politics. So continuing with that legacy will help them probably divert some attention from rising fuel prices, rising food prices, and so on and so forth, the rising inflation that is going on, any possible energy crisis in the future that is not, impossible right now, the way things are happening in supply chain around the world. So, in many of these cases, the Japanese political establishment, the conservative ruling bloc, will obviously have convenient flaws to go for, and this sort of pushing towards the right will definitely be the legacy that they are trying to push for with Abe's assassination.
All right, Anish, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. Our next story is from Sri Lanka, where after a day of mass protests, the government is on the verge of complete collapse. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has said he will resign, while Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has indicated the same. Discussions are on to figure out a new government, although there is no real clarity on how the economic crisis will be handled. We have with us Prashant from People's Dispatch for more. So, Prashant, a lot has happened in Sri Lanka over the weekend, and now the question is who is really in charge in Sri Lanka with no government?
Good question, because really the answer is a bit unclear as of now, because we know that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is out of town, so to speak. The speculation is that he is under military protection somewhere, so clearly he is not really in a position to exercise any authority. He has indicated that he will step down on the 13th of July, that is in a few 2 days from now. Now, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, on the other hand, is technically apparently working. On Saturday, he announced that he is willing to resign. So I think the catch here is that he's going to resign when a new all-party government is formed. So this gives gives the impression that the two major power centers in the country, both of them, are on the verge of stepping down. Now, because so much has been happening in so many days, we actually need to see if both these resignations will come through. That's a very big question, because there is also the question of who will form the next government. So technically, if the president steps down, the prime minister becomes the next acting prime minister, assumes charge. If the prime minister also steps down, the speaker assumes charge. Now that itself has become a site for contestation, because the Speaker of the Parliament is a close associate of the Rajapaksas. They would rather have him, be in control of the situation, at least for the next, as an interim president until the new president is elected. Then there's the question of who's going to form the next government. The idea is that there's going to be an all-party government. Now the important thing to note here is that the Rajapaksas party, the SLPP, is the dominant party in Parliament. So if it's an all-party government, technically they still have a greater chance of retaining a lion's share of the power. So all these are questions which are not really sort of answered as of now. There is speculation that the main opposition leader, Sajid Premadasa, might be one of the candidates for the president. We really don't know, how things are going to pan out. So there are frenzied negotiations going on, massive discussions behind the scene. Also, although both Rajapaksa, that is the president, and Ranil Wickremesinghe, the prime minister, have kind of lost large amount of credibility. Their houses are basically occupied. The protesters are very clear that they want them to step down. Nonetheless, they retain enough influence to sort of play in the pull strings to the background, influence negotiations, etc. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of days, because we're going to actually see if, one, the resignations come through, two, can these political parties reach a conclusion? Now, the important thing to also note is that the political parties are also wary, because the situation in Sri Lanka is so bad that anybody who takes office at this point of time is going to be blamed for the crisis. So there's also a sense of reluctance among the parties, according to media reports at least, to sort of step forward and say we'll take care of the country right now, because things are just going to get rockier in the coming months economically. We'll come to that. So right now, I think all sections are sort of engaged in very hectic, tense negotiations to sort of see if they can establish. On the other hand, like it's important to note that there is a need for a government, because it is essential for negotiations with other countries, with lending agencies to continue. More importantly, right now it is the mood is more or less peaceful. The protesters have sort of won their victory. They have occupied the residences of the president and prime minister, and they're saying they're not going back until the resignations are in. So while right now the mood is calm, there's a general sense of victory of having achieved something. This is not the end of the protest. So there also needs to be a government formed which can actually answer to the demands of the protesters as well, and the parties are aware of that. So very interesting situation in the sense that a lot of possibilities, but everything is right now up in the air for the next 2 days at least.
And Prashant, like we've been following, the economic crisis is really at the core of it all. So what's happening to that right now, and what's the way forward?
Right, that's equally an important question, because it's very difficult as of now to see a way forward, because we do know that negotiations are on with the IMF. Now the IMF was already going to put very strict conditionalities on Sri Lanka if it was going to give money, and that deal was supposed to be maybe signed in August or September or something, and this itself would have caused a lot of unhappiness among the population, given how strict IMF rules usually are. Now the thing is, with the fall of the political chaos and probable fall of this government, the IMF might wait for some more time for making sure that the regime is stable or whatever it means before proceeding further. So one possible source of money is already in danger. Secondly, it's a big question as to whether some of the bilateral creditors will be willing to lend at this point of time, considering the kind of crisis that is there. I mean, some humanitarian assistance might come, but we're not likely. I don't know if we're likely to see any kind of major structural loan or money flowing in. So the fact remains that there is no real based on the current economic model. It seems very uncertain as to how even a new government can proceed. There are radical proposals being put forward by many sections on the left, the trade unions, etc. But it's very doubtful whether the political opposition right now has that kind of imagination to step up and take those kind of radical principles. Taking those kind of radical policies may also mean having to sort of cut ties with the IMF, because there is no way that the IMF is going to give any country the freedom to implement the kind of policies it wants, because the IMF, all it has done in its history is impose appalling conditions which bring countries closer to the verge of economic ruin through such kind of policies. So keeping all this in mind, the economic condition very unlikely to sort of get better in the coming weeks and months, which is why, like I said, so many parties are reluctant to sort of form the government, because they don't want to be blamed and lose all their credibility as well. So unfortunately, we're probably looking at still more lines, more fuel shortages, more shortage of essential stuff, high food inflation, all these which actually caused the protest in the first place. There is no real answer to it, and this is actually the results of years of bad policies by successive Sri Lankan governments, which borrowed massively, which did not focus on self-sufficiency, which did not focus on raising internal revenue, which cut taxes for the benefit of the rich. All these policies together, the successive years of policies have brought Sri Lanka to the situation where they are right now.
Thank you for that update, Prashant. And finally, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships concluded yesterday in London, throwing up lots of talking points both on and off the court in the process. To round up some of those talking points, we spoke to NewsClick Sports editor Leslie Xavier.
Highlights to start with was, the talking point that we had addressed it also in stories as well as even in debrief. The exclusion of Russian players and Belarusian players being banned from the tournament this time. And a retaliation happened, in the sense a concerted effort happened from the women's and men's tour to criticizing this move from Wimbledon, the organizers of Wimbledon, the All England Club, and then they docked the ranking points. So none of the players are getting rankings. So the biggest talking point still remain that fact that all these players who played through the fortnight, and this matters more for the lower ranked players, because a jump in the ranking would mean a lot of difference for them for the upcoming tournaments, as far as their prize money, sponsorship deals are concerned, all these factors. So in a cascading effect of sorts, a geopolitical stance that was made by the organizers, thanks to the British government, it has I mean, the brunt of it is borne by the players. So that for me is the talking point as such. But as far as the tournament is concerned, we saw in the women's draw Serena Williams coming back in and playing a tournament, which I mean, playing a tournament after a gap of a year. She lost in the first round, and then two new finalists, which was pretty heartening to see. Also, two new faces coming up into the final, and Elena Rybakina, who represented Kazakhstan in the tournament, but she is originally a Russian. She was born in Russia and then trained and played for Russia till she was 18, and then she moved out of the country seeking better support, infrastructure, etc. And so that again, it's an ironic turn of events where the organizers, when they were banning the Russian players, and we have the men's world number one is a Russian, Medvedev. So by banning them, they were trying to ensure that there's no propaganda mechanisms working if the tournament gets won by a Russian. It so turned out that a Russian origin player has won. Though let's just be very clear that Russia itself has not staked any claim to the victory, and the player herself has been very clear. She thanked the Kazakhstan Tennis Federation for the support that they have extended for her and the support of the people of Kazakhstan that way. So in that sense, there has been no larger debate as to this is some kind of a poetic justice happening on the playing field as such. But Rybakina played and won by sheer merit of hers. She played really well through the tournament, and just that again, her case, she has won a maiden Grand Slam. She's 23 years old and she is world number 23 right now. No difference will make in her ranking as such after the tournament because there is no ranking points for this tournament. So that's the unfortunate sad state of it. And this needs introspection in a way. Maybe there should be a stronger action taken against tournament organizers playing the political game while organizing tournaments, especially in a game like tennis, where in a sense the player doesn't represent the country in the professional tour. They are playing in their individual capacity as such. You have noticed that they unlike the Olympic Games or whatever, or the World Championship, their national flag or the national team or etc. nothing is discussed. We only discuss the merit of the player and why he or she won the tournament as such. So in that sense, it was quite a pointless move made by the All England club in banning Russian athletes, and that's an unfortunate development that has happened, that the winners or any of these great athletes who had played really well through the fortnight, they don't get anything out of it as far as ranking points are concerned.
Okay, so Leslie, there's been a sort of a tussle between Wimbledon and professional tennis tours, and there's no stake in it much. But who has been really impacted from all of this?
Players, like I said, mentioned earlier. So in the sense that if you look at it, see, as far as the prize money is concerned or the players' chance to play the tournament is concerned, none of the other players suffered except for the Russians and the Belarusian players who were not allowed to play this tournament. But having said that, they don't suffer in their rankings as such. Like world number one, I said, the Russian Medvedev, his ranking won't suffer because none of his rivals, including Novak Djokovic, who won the men's title in Wimbledon, they won't get any points either. So in all likelihood, through the course of the year, with just one Grand Slam left, which is US Open, which is Medvedev's favorite surfers that way. So in all likelihood, he would end up the year as world number one. But look at the other players. Look at the women's champion, like we are discussing right now. So they don't get any ranking advantage either. So what happens is that in the next tournament that Elena enters, which is the Grand Slam that Elena enters, which is the US Open, tennis follows a seeding mechanism. So it's based on ranking, the current ranking, and the organizers do a seeding. And so she will have to again endure a relatively tougher draw to reach the latter stages of the tournament. Top seed means that they would get an easier draw in the initial stages, lesser ranked players, and then they come up the and then quarterfinal knockout stages, quarterfinal, semi-final stages, they would be tough matches as well. So playing a fortnight tournament, playing back-to-back tough matches and coming up and reaching the final, that would again be a big challenge. So that's again, being a Wimbledon champion and going into US Open, and then the unfortunate thing is that a ranking has not gained. So that is what she will suffer. While we should also take into consideration that 90% of tennis players on tour, they work on tight budgets. They are not superstars. They don't have super endorsement deals, so they have to get these points. Based on that only, they will be able to pitch things to their sponsors. They will, and also their chances to get invited to other tournaments, get seedings in other tournaments. So all these things suffer. So ultimately, with this move, the players have suffered as a whole, and sport has suffered. And so there is nobody at gain over here, because even the organizers, by keeping the Russians out, what have they gained except being distribute to the tournament, which has a huge history, and also to the game of tennis.
Thank you so much for that update, Leslie. And that's all we have for today, folks. For more such stories and updates from around the world, log into our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.